Hi, everybody. Thanks, Greg, for the awesome introduction. So like he said, my name is Cindy Krum. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called MobileMoxie based in Denver, Colorado. I've also written a book about mobile marketing, and I've been talking about mobile marketing since like 2005, so before the iPhone existed. So I'm super into it, super excited to be talking to you guys today about the intersection of mobile marketing and big data. So I'm going to assume that everyone walking in here came in here knowing what mobile marketing is. I'm concerned about my clicker not working. Okay, thank you. All right, so you probably all walked in here knowing what a mobile device is, but you might not have walked in here knowing exactly what big data is. And it's kind of a big concept. Big data, according to Wikipedia, is processing data sets so large and complex that it becomes difficult to process using on-hand database management tools or traditional data processing applications. So what this is saying is that big data is bigger than even the stuff that you're doing that's really sophisticated, or even the stuff that other companies are doing that's more sophisticated than what you're doing. It's bigger than deep CRM with micro-targeting, bigger than social data mining, bigger than rules-based optimization and things like that. Big data is really big. And so to understand how that impacts mobile, we have to understand that mobile is growing. And like Greg said, everyone now has lots of devices. It used to be predictable that one person might have one computer. And then we got to the point where one person might have one computer and one phone. But now, mobile internet access is ballooning to the point where one person has many, many mobile devices that interact all on the internet kind of separately. They might have a phone, a tablet, a laptop, a wearable, some kind of watch, Google Glass, and even more and more devices are getting web-enabled, like cars, GPS systems, cities, and stuff is getting web-enabled, like thermostats and stuff. So we have that, and then we have the concept or the idea that data processing and cloud storage is getting much, much cheaper and more efficient, but also the cost of developing sensors that can interact with our mobile devices is also going way down. So we're on the precipice of having a huge amount of data that we can process and do lots of things with. And the things that are collecting the data are our mobile devices that we carry with us wherever we go. So this is a picture, it's a big zoom of a sensor. And when I say sensors, what I mean are things like RFID chips and near-field communication, NFC. And these things already exist. They're in your life already. If you have a passport, it has an RFID chip. Things like chip and PIN credit cards have RFID chips. If your pet is microchipped, it has an RFID chip. Lots of things already have these sensors in them, but the cost of creating these sensors and acquiring these sensors or enabling these sensors is going way down, and phones can interact with these sensors. So the hypothesis, what I'm hoping to show you today, is that the new paradigm of mobile marketing is much more about leveraging the constant streams of data from all the devices that are capturing it and turning it into a resource in and of itself. The data becomes an asset. So let's talk about how you would do that as a company. First off, understanding it. Hopefully you're already doing this with the data that you have. This is looking at Google Analytics, trying to anticipate what your customers do and don't want, right? That's nothing new. But now consider the idea of mining the data that you already have, looking at everything that you've collected for something that you weren't looking for before. And the example here is like Google. When Google started doing heat maps of the spread of the flu virus, right? What it turned out was that people were searching for their symptoms on Google at least 2 days before they were going to the doctor. And when they went to the doctor, it took the doctor 2 days to run tests and verify and report that the flu had spread to this person. But Google had that data 4 days before the doctors even had the potential to report it. And so Google created heat maps by mining their search queries to show something that they had never intended their data to show, right? And to do something cool. The other idea is merging it, taking disparate data sets and combining them to make really interesting information. So the example here is Denmark. Years ago, people were worried that cell phones created a risk for brain cancer. So Denmark said, hey, we can figure this out. Luckily, they had a socialized healthcare system, and they had a kind of government monopoly on the mobile carrier. So they said, look, we have all these health records, and we have all these cell phone records. And we can actually match these up, the health records and the cell phone records, and say how many minutes and how many years was this person using a cell phone, and did that make them much more likely to have brain cancer? And the answer was no, it didn't. But they took two different sets of data, put them together to do something cool. The other example of merging data to do a new business is something like Zillow, where they took the MLS and they took mapping information, they combined it to create a whole new business. Sharing data. So the example here is like Swift. Swift is a company that controls all the international wire transfers. And the problem that they saw was that companies or countries were only reporting their GDP on an infrequent basis, a couple times a year. But they could see on their day-to-day records and data where money was going from what country to what country. So they could estimate running GDP figures all the time and publish that data. The last example is selling your data. So this makes some people uncomfortable, but I'm going to give you a really interesting example. In Latin America, actually in Mexico, there's a cell phone carrier called Telefonica. And Telefonica said, look, we have all this information about all our customers, and they've given us permission to use it, which I know is different in the United States, but they've given us permission to use it kind of however we want. So they created a spin-off company from the cell phone carrier to aggregate the data and anonymize the data of their customers and sell it to marketers. So it was a new line of revenue, a new line of business that Telefonica created just by reusing their data or selling it. So why aren't we there now? The problem is, originally when people started developing for mobile, they were thinking about local storage. They assumed that a visitor or a user or a download would want to save all the data on the phone. And they would let the user sometimes put the data up to the server or the cloud, but it didn't happen automatically. And for the most part, the data was locked on the phone. Then, developers kind of got hip, and they said, oh, you know what? We understand that the user doesn't necessarily want to re-enter all of their personal information, and that there are other things on the phone that already have this information, other apps, or it might be on the website. So they start on websites. So they started using things like APIs to latch in to the other aspects of the phone or other aspects of the person's data, like Facebook Connect, or the Foursquare API, or Twitter APIs, or things like that, to pull in data. So it wasn't just on the app, and the app was interacting a little bit more with other sources. But the complication happens when you realize that some data is still on the devices. And this is kind of where we are right now, where the data that's locked on the devices is problematic because it doesn't get to the other devices as people continue to acquire more and more devices. And that's frustrating, and that creates a silly situation where I have to email myself a photo to get it off my phone, or I have to re-download something on my tablet, like a song that I already downloaded on my phone. And that's frustrating. And the person really is what's in the way. So where we're headed and where you should be thinking and where the smart companies already are is in this place where you let the person get out of the way. You let the data go up to the cloud, and the data disseminates to the other devices so that it's already there. Now, that makes it really easy for the user, but that creates a privacy concern in some people's minds, right? Obviously. Multiply that when you realize that in the future there are going to be more opportunities to collect information with all these sensors and stuff like that. So all the devices that we carry around can interact not only with each other, but also with our environment. So that creates a bit of a concern. Enter the NSA slide. So let's talk about what you can track. And there are differences between what you can track on a mobile app versus a mobile website. Mobile apps tend to be a bit better at tracking interesting information. Mobile apps can interact directly with the operating system, which means that they can pull information from your contacts, from your calendar, from your email, and from your pictures. So they can interact there. So that gives you a lot more information. And once you've given permission for the app to interact with your photos, you don't actually limit beyond, like, can you access my photos? Yes or no. So there's a lot of information that once permission is given, the app can have access to. Now, beyond that, there's the in-app submissions, the things that you actually do with the app, like if it's a diet tracker or exercise fitness tracker. Everything that you put in the app is also something that you could potentially have permission to collect and aggregate. Beyond that, there's the in-app purchasing, there's the time, location, and device stamps, and there's any web interaction if the app requests something from the web. Now, the websites, mobile websites, are a bit less sophisticated in terms of things that you can track. You can still track web submissions, downloads and purchases, and then time, location, and device, but to a lesser degree. So apps are really where the tracking can get really awesome. And I kind of look up to the NEC, or the NSA. I think that if you can track it, you probably can. And if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. But the difference is permission. In a marketing world, we have to get permission. We have to avoid NSA-style scandals. And the way to do that is with permission. Notice the Orwellian wallpaper with the cameras hidden? Okay. So you have to get permission. If you're going to track, great, awesome, but get permission. And when you're getting permission, the idea is you need to be telling people what kind of information you're going to collect, asking their permission to collect it, telling them what you'll be using it for, and if you're going to share it, like Telefonica did. And once you do that, then you've probably done enough. So let's get into what kind of information is put into apps and how that can be used. So I mentioned the calorie trackers. Think about if Fitbit created an API where it collected all the information that people were putting into their Fitbits and all of their exercises, but it also allowed other fitness trackers to use the API to send that information to aggregate it. So they could actually create heat maps of fitness, right? And they could show a neighborhood and say, these people over here, they're really killing it on the exercise thing. These people, not so much, right? Or similarly, if you did the Weight Watchers application or My Calorie Counter or what have you, you could see what people are eating and how many calories they're taking in per day and create really interesting data just based on what the app has, what people have submitted, and taking that location in, or taking, dividing it with other kinds of information, like what time people are eating, and graphing that out, and using the data really interesting ways. But also some of these food apps actually have brand name products listed in them. So you can say, oh, well, I ate a Kellogg's Pop-Tart. And for marketing, that's huge because you know who's buying exactly what because they're confessing it in the app, right? So that can be huge for marketing. But the next thing is you have to realize that the phones know where you live. They know a lot about your location. And in fact, location is the easiest thing one of the easiest things for an app to track. And that's because there are so many different ways the app can either specifically get your location or estimate your location. Think about the carrier networks triangulating your location based on the different location from a carrier tower. And that happens every time you answer the phone, every time you send a text message, every time you do anything that involves your data plan, that you get a location and the carrier can see where you are. Beyond that, you can triangulate location with Wi-Fi signals, and the Wi-Fi signals that your phone can perceive are much stronger than you would believe based on the networks that your phone shows. They can get much lighter connections and use those to triangulate your location in addition to the connections that you can see in your network list, right? Now, beyond those two things, there's, of course, GPS, if it's turned on. And then there's other things where location is stored in the phone as metadata. Think about all of your images. Whenever you take a picture, the metadata includes the location where that picture was taken. So if you give an app access to your photos, they can crawl that metadata and understand where you spend your time. Now, that's super useful for marketers if you understand people's habits and people's daily routines and understand when they're breaking their daily routines. Then you can send them adjusted marketing saying, oh, it looks like she's going out to lunch. Let's give her a lunch coupon. If I don't normally go out to lunch, which I don't. So the location information alone is super powerful. Now add in the sensors that I mentioned, or even non-sensor web-enabled devices within your home. Things like your web-enabled thermostat, your web-enabled security system that comes through the cable company, right, where you have your cameras and you can see when your kids get home and stuff like that. All that stuff happens over the web, and that's stuff that we can track. But I think that that's going to go much further with the decreasing cost of sensors. And things that don't necessarily need to be on the web can still interact with your phone or with your devices. And that might be things like the water heater, where if the water heater has a sensor that can tell whether or not you're home, it can tell whether or not it needs to be on. It doesn't need to be heating water if no one's in the house, right? Or your thermostat can tell and turn on and off based on who's home. And there are lots of different examples where house objects can interact either through the web or through sensors, and I expect this to go kind of crazy for a while. If you've been watching TV, Sleep Number Bed just launched a bed that competes with all the sleep apps that people have. So you have the app that can track how long you're sleeping and how well. Now the Sleep Number Bed can chart and graph it for you without using the app. But that's probably, they're going to start interacting that with their own app, right? So you have loads of information that you can use for marketing. And I'll give you a second to read this, but I think this is a bit dark, but maybe possible, right? Wherever there's a technology growth, there's a potential for marketing. Okay, so now take this out of the dark and don't think about losing your home. Think about this in a scenario for like shopping. Maybe you check in and out of a store and they send you the daily coupon, or they know what you bought last time and say, how did that work out? Do you want to write a review? Or checking in and out of a transportation system, like a subway system. If they know that every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, you check in and take a certain route, but they've seen other people who take that route check in and not check out on time, they know that line is running slow, right? So they can automatically, when you check in with your phone to the subway system, they can send you a different route. Or they can say, you're going to be here a while, why don't you stop and get a coffee? Something like that. So beyond that, let's take it bigger, right? We talked about the home picture is kind of to illustrate the concept of the Internet of Things, right? Things are getting Internet enabled and we can interact with our things. But when you take that to the next level, you create this concept that they're calling smart cities, where things can interact with each other and they can do it within a home or within a larger context. So people are postulating and developing city management systems where if we recognize that there's a traffic jam on a certain part of town, they can change the stoplights to help facilitate moving the traffic along faster, right? But let's pretend we're a carrier and we can see that everyone, where they are and if they're moving or not. So we can see like 200 cell phones that haven't moved more than a mile in 5 minutes when their emails all recheck, right? So they're sitting on the highway, the phone hasn't moved, and it's the time when these people normally commute. So we can send that information back to a city grid, right, to say, hey, it's apparent that there's a traffic jam on this highway. Or we can sell that information to real-time marketers and say, hey, these people might be interested in getting off the highway, why don't you send them a coupon for a happy hour, right, at the next exit while driving. Well, hopefully they take their time. Right? So that's cool, right? That's massive data that we aggregate and process really quickly to do really cool things. And it's all based on the devices that we carry with us all the time. So Genevieve Bell is this really cool woman, and she has the coolest job ever, even cooler than mine, which is rare. And Intel hired her to follow people around and evaluate and write down and study how they use technology. And so she writes about this. And she wrote that maybe the Internet of Things isn't about stoplights, it'll be more about delighting us, right? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how can the Internet of Things and how can big data really make us more interesting, or at least have more fun, learn about ourselves. So the easy example here is the Facebook algorithm. This made a lot of news last week, where Facebook said that they can predict when someone is about to change their relationship status. Either they're going to be in a relationship, or they're going to be married, or they're going to be out of a relationship all of a sudden. And they can do this based on who's friending who, when they're friending, who's tagged in pictures with other people tagged in the picture. They have a whole algorithm to figure this out. But of course, they also have an algorithm to figure out what kind of marketing is appropriate for a person who's in that stage of their life. If it's clear to the algorithm that someone's about to get married, then Facebook will be targeting engagement rings to the guy, right? Probably the girl too, right? She'll look and suggest. But, so that's fascinating, useful for marketing. So this one is interesting too, but much more personal. And I say this kind of to scare you and be shocking, but this is data that's been published from the biggest international network of adult sites. And 50% of this traffic is also mobile and tablet, right? And so we can see lots of people are using their mobile devices to access that kind of content. Let's cross that with other data, right? This is the impact of particular TV shows and sporting events on their traffic, right? So they've crossed something totally unrelated, like NFL games, with that traffic to show how much people like TV. So now imagine your own data sets, whatever kind of information you have, if it's boring, if it's exciting, and think about how you could use that data, mine it, cross it with other data sets to do really interesting things, or to at least reach different customers and monetize the data. Now, the last bit of information I want to give you is just information about data sets that are made publicly available. Different governments and private groups are already in the process of publishing huge data sets that you can cross with the data that you already have. And so this is a list of data resources who are publishing information that you can use with the data that you're collecting from your customers. There are other ways to market and get data, and this is a list of different ways to get data. So you can always license data. There are bidding websites where you can auction your own data or buy data at an auction. And then you can always create APIs for your data so that other people can be using your data and incorporating it in their marketing. And so that's really cool. So I have a puppy here because you're supposed to like remember things better if you have like a happy feeling. So remember, when you're thinking about your data, when you're planning for the future, you should be collecting as much data as you can, getting permission. But then think about monetizing it. You need to understand it, potentially mine it, or merge it, or share it, or sell it. So that's my information. Thank you very much. That's my book.